Next, I'd like to introduce Josh Hoff, who's an experienced software developer here at Bitovi who's been in the industry for almost 10 years. He's done it all, front end, back end, DevOps, and more with tons of different languages, frameworks, and tools. He knows that managing large projects well with Git can be difficult. So today he's going to compare and contrast some popular approaches so you can pick and choose what works best for your team.
All right, thanks, Jason. So I'm going to be talking about 3 different Git strategies, and these are Git Flow, the Git projects workflow, which is called a merge workflow, and then GitHub Flow. So these are all battle tested, and they've been grown from different projects that have different requirements. So it's interesting to compare and contrast them. So before we get started, some terms you'll need to know. Common ones that you've probably seen if you use Git Merge, where you bring one or more commits into a branch at once. Cherry pick, you can do one or more commits with this, but it generally picks one at a time. And then the terms that you may not have heard before are long-lived branch, which is a branch in a workflow that's intended to live forever. And you might recreate it or destroy it, but generally it's supposed to be around, and you're going to have to deal with it as a developer. And the opposite, short-lived branch. So that's a branch that's intended to be closed. They won't always be around. Usually there's multiple of them. These still may stick around for a long time, but they are intended to be closed eventually. So let's start with the Git Merge workflow. It's used by the Git project, and I believe the kernel as well. Like I said, it uses Git Merge and Git Cherry Pick, and then it uses 4 long-lived branches to manage changes over time. So the branches it uses are called maint, master, next, and pu for proposed updates. Maint covers the next maintenance release. Master has all the commits for the next full release. And then next is where you're testing commits for stability. And then proposed updates is kind of a throwaway branch, which we'll talk about later. So in the Git workflow, there is this concept of integration branches. And so this is for testing finished branches, finished features, and bugs and stuff, and making sure that they work well with other finished features. So these branches are usually short-lived. You kind of pack a bunch of them together and run all the tests and make sure they work well together, even if they work well individually. And then back to that PU branch, proposed updates. This is kind of an official integration branch, so everyone can try out, hey, we're working on getting these features into the next branch and eventually into main and then later into maint. So we'll just throw them all in proposed updates and let people play with them there. So it's pretty simple. It deals with it. First, they expect you to just kind of use general Git Hygiene. So each commit should pass the tests. It should be standalone. You should be able to revert any commit or add it, and it should just kind of do its own thing. And then kind of the main aspect of this workflow is called merge upwards. So you put your commits in the oldest branch that needs them, and this is for the maintainers. The people that are suggesting changes go through either pull requests or email, and they'll just use topic branches or feature branches. And then the maintainers will periodically merge their old branches into newer branches over time. So if we go back to our list of branches, they're obviously ordered. So you would start with, if you needed a commit in maint for a bug fix or something, then you would merge it into that and then merge upwards. If you were adding a new feature and it didn't get into a maintenance release, then maybe you would merge it into a master and then merge it upwards eventually. So it's pretty simple. So the next one we'll be talking about is Git Flow. This became popular and it was developed around 2010. It has a branching strategy as well as some naming conventions for short-lived branches. And because of all these conventions, it's pretty well supported by tooling. There's been a lot of tooling written around this, including scripts and web services and all kinds of other good stuff. So the long-lived branches it has are really only master and develop. So develop is where the work happens, and master should always be green, like the test should pass, and it should have the latest production-ready code. So then the short-lived branches all have these prefixes. So you put your features on feature branches and you start those from develop. You work on your features there, and then you merge it back into develop when you're done. You put your releases on release branches, and this is just for like small cleanup or bumping versions or just metadata changes when you're about to release a feature. And then you merge it back into develop and master when it's completed or released. And then hot fixes are just like release branches, except for they're for quick changes, usually critical bugs. And you merge them back into master when they're fixed. So it's a bit of a shorter path. And this is the official graphic. It looks very daunting and scary, but it's actually pretty simple. I think I can't really see here, but this is develop, and then master is, if I can move this guy, there we go. Master is over here. And then it just kind of talks about what kind of commit should go where, but it's all pretty predictable what you would assume. Hot fixes are for bug fixes, develop is where all the code happens, and then it talks about how things get merged. So GitHub Flow is the last and simplest of the strategies, and it works well for web services, which is probably why it was pioneered at GitHub. So it uses master, which is the long-lived branch, and it's the default branch that Git gives you. And then feature branches for developing features and bugs and everything else. These are usually tested in place when they're still on the feature branch, sometimes even deployed the feature branch before it makes it into master. So master is really considered to be like production ready, no bugs here, like seriously. Some places will sort of deploy master, but then, have like a more like the release branches where they're kind of more hardened. The code's had more time to run into users and run into problems. But master here is supposed to be very well tested. And that's really it. It just has a couple of branches. You end up with a lot of feature branches, but it's pretty simple. So then you might be thinking, well, it doesn't prescribe as much around the releases and stuff. So how do you know that you're getting things right? How do you avoid problems? Well, if you're building a web service, then you can deploy your release branches to like a subset of users or direct a very small amount of traffic to those branches. And then you can look at the metrics and see if there are more errors or something. You can make an integration branch, just like in the Git Merge Workflow. And you could even stage an integration branch if you wanted to somewhere else and deploy that as a canary release. So it kind of leans on the fact that a lot of web services they really have one major release. So like GitHub.com isn't really versioned for its users. So you can use that as an advantage. So the recommendations here are just kind of, know what you're doing and why. The Git Merge Workflow is in a manual page in Git itself, and its first paragraph kind of really states this really well. Follow the rules, but only if you have good reasons to do so. So when you're choosing a strategy, you want to think about like your whole life cycle. Like the GitHub.com strategy, you're not necessarily going to have something in Git to tell you how to test code, but that doesn't mean it has to be in Git, but it does mean you have to think about it and think about how this strategy is going to work with it. And then you should feel free to pick these a la carte. So think about your team, your project structure, how you want to deploy and release things, and your team's familiarity with Git, because if you pick something like Git Flow, you might add extra tools, which are more to learn. They're not necessarily that complicated, but it's another thing that could go wrong. And then pick the simplest one that works for you, but don't be militant about that. Add as much complexity as you think your project warrants, especially on the larger projects. Git Flow is very prescriptive, but that can be useful for your team. So these are the sources that I used in this talk. The GitHub Flow I'll call out is really nice and interactive. If you do Git Help Workflows, that's already installed with Git, and you can view that. And then if you want to keep learning about different workflows, Atlassian has some other ones that I haven't covered in this blog post, which is also worth the read. And that is all I have. Any questions?
Hey, Josh, is it just social engineering for changing from one to the other? Like if you start very, very simple and then your project grows, it's just a matter of getting the whole team on board to do the new flow, or are there gotchas or things you'd have to worry about going from one to the other?
I would say the same concerns apply when you're picking a strategy than when you're moving to one. You have to think about the needs of your project and also the abilities of your team. And there could be politics involved in that in your company. but they might have valid reasons for wanting to keep things simple or keep things how they were before. So, I would just pay attention to those things as you're trying to move. There might be some pushback, but if you have a good reason to do so, then you should be able to do so.
Cool.